Story 1. Jack Nice. Frequently among one's daily travels are others often overlooked by the dizzying pace of modernization. I recall, however, an incident in my own life when the most peculiar of happenings occurred. The day it took place upon had been the most average among many. I had ventured to town, be it by the cheapest means available, by bus. I had bought some cleaning supplies for my bathroom, shared by 4 other individuals, for I lived in a dormitory back then. Still, with my meager savings, I indulged myself with few snacks that I planned to nibble upon when writing my daily quandaries in the early hours of the morning. By my stomach's accord, I also purchased a juicy Reuben sandwich from a local shop, as was its namesake. It had been downpouring since the morning, a common occurrence this far north by the ocean in California. It was not till late in the afternoon that I went, the rain making me reluctant to go earlier. By the time I had gotten what I needed and had eaten dinner, that early evening had fallen. Fearing I would miss the few and fleeting last buses back to campus, I jogged hurriedly from the shop to the nearest bus stop, leaving a generous tip on my way out. Nearly out of breath by the rabbit-like sprint and queerly light-headed, I noticed how eerily quiet and dark everything had become. The ever-flowing traffic 10 people seemed vacant, as the dim buzz of the overhead light seemed to be my only company. As I journeyed closer to the benches, it became clear that I was not alone. Illuminated the overhead lights was the form of a slender man, thinner than my own scarecrow-like physique, who leaned against the glass frame of the bus stop with a hand in his pocket, while the other held a cigarette he was smoking. Not being one for the smell of burning or tobacco, I simply strolled by him, taking a seat on the farther bench so I would not suffer inhaling in more second-handedly than need be. Soon after, I could hear his shoe rubbing against the asphalt, most likely putting out the cigarette before I could hear him coughing violently. Out of curiosity, I looked out to see if he was all right, only to be greeted by his prodding footsteps as he approached the benches. Quickly I drew my head back, hoping it would be unnoticed, as by my surprise he stood before me in the bleak light scenery. It was here I noticed the strangeness of his appearance, as he had been cloaked by the shadows prior. Physically, his skin was a strange pale whiteness that seemed chalk-like in comparison, and his eyes were a glowing green that looked as if they could burn by their gaze. Of his attire, he wore a flowing black overcoat that seemed tattered by the weather and a matching black fedora. Under it he appeared to be wearing a full dark purple suite that blended in color with the overcoat. Contrasting that was the snow-white undershirt. Bright red rose nestled near his suit jacket's peaked lapel, and milk-white coverings of his dress shoes. One could speculate that he looked either like someone from the 1920s, 1940s pulp fiction gangster, or a theater performer. He stared at me for what must have been a good 5 minutes before he came close and sat down next to me. When he sat, I could see another strangeness about him, which was his mouth being covered by a medical mask. Of any normality, his hair was jet black like my own, and his height was only great by mine by 6 or 7 inches. By his looks, I gathered he was only older than myself by 1 or 2 years. There was nothing but silence as I sat there, with growing apprehension for this stranger and his eccentric atmosphere he had about himself. I was nearly at the seams of distress before he began talking, at first starting with a soft rasping whisper to normal speech. "Hey there, kid. Sorry to rouse you if you don't feel like talking but I'd be a curious sort of fellow, so figures to ask you where you'd be heading tonight." His voice was a unique one, having both slang and dialect merge into a gruff yet guttural tone that was slightly comical. I informed him that I was heading back to my dorm, and that was a student of college not far from here. His eyes widened. "College beau, eh? How nice that must be for you." I'd never felt obligated to be one. Oh, don't get me wrong. It's not like I'm some sort of guy who feels he couldn't hack away at it and do it. No, I'm very educated. Could have gotten to Oxford or Yale with my standings in school. It's just the tone in his voice became soft and incoherent, that it seemed like he was mumbling to himself. It was then that I had noticed he was staring down at a picture he held loosely in his right white-gloved hand. From what I could make of it, it appeared to be the boy when he was younger by 2 or 3 years, with what I could assume was his mother. Unlike most pictures, the boy appeared to have a listless face, while his mother a light smile. It made me more unsettled before I could hear his voice rising. "I never just saw the point in any of it, you see. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad thing or anything. I can understand that most folks who are doctors, engineers, chemists, what have you, need to future their education so they can do their jobs. But you put in all that effort, and what do you really get? A lousy piece of paper saying you did it all. And who is that really for? Society and yourself. I never felt I had to prove anything to either." He began chuckling lowly after he said this, but it was neither a laughing sort of chuckle nor a sad one. I could not place it emotionally. It was only a faint spell, for he went about his ramblings not soon after. Always wanted to visit good old Collie, though never could understand why myself. I guess my body just sort of felt drawn to this place, you know, like someone who goes out into the world looking for something but they just can't pin it down. You know what I mean." I nodded lightly in agreement before, with the utmost tension in my voice, asking where about he had come here from. If he was pleased by this, I could not tell due to his covered mouth, but his answer to it was a gentle tone that was unlike his low, gruff, and guttural voice. Arkport. Confused by this, I inquired of him just what he meant by that, to which he replied with a high, gruff voice that stammered slightly as he spoke. "Oh, my apologizes. It's a small town in New York, you see. I know that most California folk like yourself probably think of the city of the same namesake when you hear that name. I suppose it's how we think of LA when we heard the name California. Truth is, though the city was far away from where I lived, the town was an oddity itself, broken up into sections that spanned far and wide. Busy and lively as it was in its center, its outskirts were bare and bleak in population. That's where we lived. Honestly, the most morbid part of it all was I could walk outside and not be 3 minutes from a cemetery. Echoing was that strange laughter as he fell into another small fit. With all he had told me, my mind could still not stop focusing on the picture he held, with curiosity getting the better of my normal restrained persona. I asked a bit bluntly of it. It was here his laughing ceased, his eyes looking downcast at the picture as they seemed to droop by a look of sadness. This was only temporary, as he turned to me, and though his mouth was covered, I could feel him smiling widely back at me, almost unnaturally so. It was more unsettling than everything else about him, but there was nothing I could now do but listen with an acute attention. A detail nestled in the back of my mind seeking knowledge of this stranger's origins and background. With a childlike vigor back in his frame, he resumed in his raspy, weathered voice. "Ah, this old thing, I was wondering when you'd acquire about it. Lot of people do when they see me. I can fancy you were probably looking at it earlier, but it's fine. Normal fella like yourself probably will assume that it's of me and my mother. You hit it dead center there, Chief. It was taken. When was it taken? 2 years ago. For years ago. It slips my memory, and the date was washed out by the weather. My memory hasn't been good since 4 years ago. I can recall everything else fine 'cept then. Well, that and my name, was it Jack, John, Johnny, James? I mostly just go with Jack to keep it simple. Last name, too. Napa, Norman, Newman, Napier. I decided just to have it be nice. Jack nice sounds friendly, don't you think? I nodded somberly. In truth, my apprehension had grown to slight fear at him, for I had once recalled the all-too-true tales of the wandering homeless that sometimes settled among the old concrete ruins that lay like monuments of an ancient city behind the mall we were positioned by. My natural pessimistic assumptions led me to believe he was among them. One is never certain among the homeless those who may be unstable, which is why precaution must often be taken. By this fright of unknown, I felt compelled with my soul to flee, but my curiosity to this man kept me stationed like an anchor in the deep, dark depths of the ocean floor. He reached in with his left hand to his jacket's pocket, pulling from it a deck of cards before placing the picture into where the cards had been. He shuffled them wildly with both his hands, first a simple bridge before doing several small loops with them in the air. It was a surreal phantasm of circus-like performance that lifted the dread I felt. He clutched the deck with both hands as he began simply shuffling them in his palms up and down. Once more he ranted. I've loved cards since I was a small child. My grandparents, you see, would play hand and foot frequently, probably as frequently as my mother and me would visit them. I was never good at either the games nor holding them, so I had this sort of gadget that allowed me to hold them. My gram taught me basic games like Go Fish and Crazy Eights when I was hardly even 7. I took to it like fish to water, though by the time I was 14, I knew all the games and held the cards like a master. It became less of watching the games and more of winning at that. He swiftly motioned, and the deck still in his hands as he drew a card from the top of the deck and held it out to me. His tone and look upon me became rather childlike as he spoke. Guess the card, not one for parlor tricks, but being a natural lucky guesser, I choose spades on the highest suit of the ace. He flipped the card, proving my guess correct. Bravo. Ace of spades it is. That's what my grandfather was, an ace in everything he did. He was a master gardener and card player, a kind man who loved children. I know because he loved me. Oh, how he held me on his lap as a child, and the tales he would tell me. He taught me just about everything I know, from cards to shuffleboard to whistling like a bird. He was quite the card, too. He would tell a joke by say either stop me if you've heard this one before, or he'd just do it deadpan. Oh, I love him, I love him, I loved him. But one day as he got up, he had a stroke. He wasn't the same after that. He looked the same. He sounded the same, but he wasn't the same. I still loved him, but then he just withered. I couldn't cry when it happened because I was far away then. When I was close, I never thought I could cry so hard. A sense of piety overcame me for this strange nightly phantom, but when I was about to speak, he simply put the card on the bottom of the deck as he drew another card mimicking the same tone as earlier. Guessed the card. Perplexed by the oddity of continuing, I had no choice but to comply. I surmised it must be hearts and royal at that, so I guessed queen. He flipped, revealing my guess correct yet again. If I could see behind that medical mask, I felt yet again he was grinning abnormally, which held me with an unexplainable feeling of sickening dread. Had he even ceased since my first assumption? Yes, sir. Right twice in a row. My mother and grandmother were queens when it came to their hearts. My gram the kinder, but my ma was still kind, maybe too kind in some ways. She never really asked much o' me, grades or otherwise. Told me how proud she was that I was her son, how she loved me, worked tooth and nail so we could have a decent life, but workin' only gets you so far. His voice began to trail off again into a low mumble before, rhythmically and mechanically, he flipped the card back upon the deck. Again he drew a card from the top in this gross pantomimed theatrical act as he held it out towards me once again, parroting the words. Guess the card. I wonder how long it had been now since I had first come upon this eccentric ghoul. I carried no watch on me, and never one for time. I could scarcely tell 5 minutes from an hour. The next closest bus stop was rather far, and I dared not venture that far in this nightmarish dark that had become the current atmosphere. I was bound to simply wait for mercy to be free of this stranger's oddity. Until that freedom, I was his audience. I guessed the next would be the other black suit, clubs, and since it was on my mind of numeric numbers, I choose 2. Again I could sense the ghastly smile of his mouth as his green eyes looked into mine. Shivers of fear running through my frame, though my face did no convey it. He clapped comically, almost as if mocking me. Ding, 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 jackpot. 3 sevens for the winner. All I ever got was 2 cents. 2 cents from my old man. He was always trying to take me hunting or fishing. Oh, I enjoyed the fishing and being with them, but he just drank all the time. He eventually stopped talking me and left me alone at home while he went to the bar to drink all his money away. When he didn't work, he drank all ma's hard-earned money away. This time was different than the prior 3, for he began chuckling strangely as before, yet it was drastically different. It felt sorrowful yet angry with a harsh bitterness. He grasped the 3 bottom cards and the top card while he dropped the deck. The cards sprawled chaotically about. It's funny, pal. It really is. My family, they were a stacked deck. I could tell when the ones who loved me were real and when the ones who didn't were nothing but a bluff. They all said they loved me. They all said they cared, but only a few of them ever meant it. But maybe the real sad thing about it is I still loved those who I could tell didn't love me. I was alone. I had friends, but they lived too far away. So I pondered to distract me from it, eating away at me. I wondered my existence, my place in the world, the value my life had. I never could come up with an answer till one day the lights above began to flicker strangely, unnaturally. There seemed to be a dawning look of malice in his eyes as he spoke. One day, 2 or 4 years ago, the person who I knew didn't love me the most because all he loved was alcohol, my father, let me see the truth. Oh, it was at first a day like any other. I was just home watching cartoons when his car skidded sharply into the driveway. He flung the door open, that it probably broke the handle, as it hit the wall. He gave me this look, a look even in his most drunken of stupors I had ever seen on him, as he told me to come with him to the bedroom. I was afraid. I told him no. He grabbed me by the arm and dragged me there, locking the door behind him. He told me to sit on the bed and face him. Shaking nervously, I complied. His eyes burned into me. He removed his belt. Bitterly, unlike him, he asked me why I hated him. Shocked, I stammered to say what as he struck the belt buckle against my back. The sharp pain made me double over, feeling tears stream down my face. He asked me it again. I tried raising my head and was able to speak a W before I saw the belt lopped around his fist as he smashed me with the buckle. The sharp snap of my nose breaking was beyond words. Yet again, he asked the same mind-numbing question. He gave me no chance as he struck my stomach with his fist before throwing me on the bed. Breathless, I tried to maintain concessions as his large form crushed my legs by sitting on them, asking me again. I knew no longer could I call this man father or even a man for whatever this was. It was a monster, but the worst was yet to come, gripping my torso to hold my hand down to hold me down. He told me it was my fault they were getting divorced, that I had placed such things in my mother's head. I knew it was bullshit as she stayed with him to give me a sense of normality. He grinned wickedly as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a grisly Bowie knife. Horrified, I asked what he aimed to do. He said, it said. His speech became more erratic and broken as he nervously adjusted his light green bow tie and messed with his hair. He seemed to be adjusting the mask that hid his mouth, but it came loose and flew among the steady wind that seemed to pick up. The lights went out. It was pitch darkness by the overhead storm clouds. But he still spoke. I forget what that thing said. I just felt blood against my face, and in my mouth I spit it at that monster, blinding him. I grabbed the rifle from under the bed. He always had it loaded. It called me a dirty bastard as I just shot it. Stammering, it tried to grasp something but fell dead. Another car, running, my mother. I smiled at her. She screamed. I run towards her. She's running away. The rifle goes off again. She falls down. Blood. I killed my mother. The harsh rising gale was hallowed by the strange laughing that seemed to dry the air. Angrily, I demand why he was laughing, his grin becoming visible. I am not laughing. I called him a liar because he was grinning. I am not grinning. My fear had been replaced by rage as I felt the desire to hit him. But I froze. Horror froze me. He wasn't lying on either, for his face was disfigured by a large Glasgow smile. Instantly, I jumped to my feet and withdrew to the lamppost. That strange laugh of his rose to an almost devilish-like pitch as he dropped the 3 cards and stood facing me. My face felt drained of blood as I saw him draw from his overcoat pocket a revolting blood-stained Bowie knife. Slowly, he advanced upon me. It's funny, too. I can't remember just what he did to my face. Must have been bad, 'cause as soon as I saw it, I started vomiting. I just couldn't stand it, so I got this crazy idea to take his old Bowie knife and... Oh, what's the point of it all? Our game isn't over yet. Nobody's ever got it right for times in a row. Come on, guess the card, will ye? Come on, guess. I stammered to speak as he had advanced towards me, so much so he began to pull the knife back. I knew he meant to use it on me. Guess, damn you. You've just have to guess. Nobody's ever guessed this one right. Nobody. I know you can guess, guessed, guessed, guess. Widely in a frenzy of utter terror, I screamed in a rush of panic as the knife now was in inches from my face. I stammered the letters J and O before I felt the blade sliced my right cheek. I stumbled back, falling unconscious, as in the dimness of sense I heard him proclaim aloud in a wicked voice, "Lucky guy, here's the truth of me. I'm nothing but a sick, twisted joke." I felt someone pushing at my form as my sense came around along with the sounds of blasting sirens. An ambulance technician was standing over me along with a group of people. It was strange. It had been the same light-headed sensation I had seen when I first ran over here. "Hey, he's coming out of it. Kid, are you all right? Looks to me like you must have fainted or something due to exhaustion. Someone said you ran over here, then stopped dead in your tracks, falling like a tree. You cut your face up kind of bad on the right side. Must have been from one of these loose pebbles on the asphalt. Think you can stand?" Helping me to my feet, he inspected me before determining I was all right. "You were out for a good 8 minutes by the time we got here. Nobody wanted to come near you due to that black overcoat of yours and the way you were laughing so strangely." I staggered, trying to keep my bearings. On the ground lay my lucky pack of cards my grandfather gave me and a picture of me and my mother from 3 years ago. Those were happier days, but I never smiled back then. Always found it unnatural how people smiled in photos. The cards had been splayed over the ground. "Truthfully, so you know, my parents are divorced, and my grandfather had passed on due to a growing illness with his mind." As I began to pick up the cards, I surmised my mind had blurred some kind of twisted hallucination. However, what came next was something that keeps me secluded to this day, with the greatest urge to never venture alone again. As I picked up the Joker card, I felt the life drain out of me. For there, written in my blood, were the words, "Jack Nice was here." I pondered in the ways I was Jack Nice, but detested all the more in the ways Jack Nice was me. Story 2. Routine. A routine can be defined by a series of regular actions followed in a similar pattern. Most people have many routines they follow on a day-to-day basis, be it a morning routine before they go to work, or the order of machines they visit when they go to the gym. The human race are creatures of habit, and having routines can provide a comfort of familiarity. Sarah was no exception when it came to routines. In fact, it could be said that she followed her daily regimes with more precision than the average person. Sarah worked in a steady job in an office block which she had started a few months back when she moved to the city. Anyone who has a job with regular hours knows how easy a routine can be to develop, and Sarah's routine developed as soon as she moved into her flat. She lived alone, bar her cat, and she lived exactly a 20-minute bus ride away from the office and 20 minutes back home at the end of her shift. The fact that she'd not been in the city long meant that her social interactions were currently limited to the brief conversations with her co-workers and a bi-weekly phone call with her mother. Some would call her current life mundane, but Sarah was genuinely happy to be out of her parents' house and starting to make her own way in life. One of the drawbacks of being the new girl in the office meant she was assigned the early shift that no one wanted, since her job description was basically a glorified PA to a few of the senior members. Most of her work needed to be done before the rest of the staff came in at 9 a.m., Her workday officially started at 7. Relying on public transport, however, meant that the bus she needed to get was actually at 6 a.m., making her work day really start around 6:30 when she had got in and made herself a coffee. Sarah didn't mind at all. Her 5 a.m. wake-up gave her enough time to have a shower and breakfast before work, and her early finish time meant she had time to get an hour workout in the office gym before rush hour traffic. Her evening routine rarely differed either. She would get home, feed her cat, clean and tidy her flat, eat dinner, catch up on laundry, and finally settle on the couch to watch a movie or read for a few hours before she went to bed early to be up at 5 a.m. the next day. Sarah had adjusted to her role in her job with ease, and the move from a smaller town was less of a culture shock than she anticipated. She had always felt content in her own company, so living on her own didn't take much adjustment either. Within a month of living there, she felt completely settled into her new life. The move had come at a perfect time for the early shift she had. It was mid-July when the move happened, and the mornings in England, while cold, were light when she left the house. In the back of her mind was a slight dread for the coming winter months, where the sun wouldn't come up until she had been at the office for a few hours. Sometimes the bus that she relied on was late, leaving her standing there in cold for longer than necessary and derailing her routine. Sarah has suspicions that come the winter months and the inevitable bad weather, the bus may not even come at all, leaving her only choice to call in work or attempt to walk in on a road that wasn't fully lit by street lamps. Still, she refused to learn how to drive in a city that had little to no parking, and she hoped that come winter she wouldn't always be the one who had to come in early. She expected with a high turnaround there would be another new employee to take her place. The months rolled by and the days got shorter, but no one new was hired to take her place on the early shift, even though it made her uncomfortable to be alone at the bus stop in the dark. She couldn't afford to kick up too much of a fuss at her job about her shifts, since she had stated in the interview she was happy to do them, and no other places were hiring that could match her wages, so she resolved to grin and bear it. When thinking about it, it wasn't too bad. There was at least one lamp above the bus stop outside her home, and she had gotten pretty good at leaving the house and practically stepping onto the bus, provided it wasn't late that day. Sarah would only have to endure the darkness for a few minutes maximum. The first few weeks of waning light in the mornings weren't too bad. The really cold weather hadn't kicked in yet, and the street lamp was always on when she arrived at the bus stop. Its low orange glow was a comforting sight in the dark when she walked from her house to the stop. It was only when it started to get even darker that Sarah's routine was disrupted. There was the time where the bus was 20 minutes late, and the later commuters started to arrive when it finally turned up. A week or so passed, and then another incident where the bad weather had made a road flood further on in her journey, and the detour made her almost late for work twice. The most notable incident, though, was when Sarah had been up later the night finishing a book that she had been reading, a story she was so captivated by she couldn't put down until she had finished, resulting in rushing her nighttime routine and forgetting to reset the alarm on her phone for the morning. Luckily, her body clock was so in sync she woke up naturally half an hour later than she had planned to, but no so late she couldn't make up for lost time. In fact, in her rushing around to get ready on time, skipping the shower and grabbing breakfast to go. She ended up at the bus stop earlier than she did on a normal day. It had gotten to the point in the year where the sun had yet to cast any rays in the sky this morning. However, it was a reasonably clear night, and Sarah was pleased that the rest of her day wouldn't be thrown off from her earlier mishap. She stood under the street lamp and checked her phone for the time, while rubbing her forearm to fight off the cold. She still had 5 minutes until the bus was due to show up, if it was on time. Sarah stayed on her phone, flicking through social media to pass the time. She considered posting a status describing her morning's mishap, but hesitated, realizing that no one else on her friends list would be online this early. She sighed and pulled her arms in closer. The temperature had defiantly dropped in the last few days. Giving up on her phone, she put it back in her pocket and closed her eyes. The sudden wake-up and panic hadn't given her the chance to truly wake up, and she could still feel the remnants of sleep behind her eyes. She took the chance to try and fully relax, taking in her surroundings. There was a soft whistle of wind through the trees, and a far-off sound of an ambulance siren towards the city. After a few minutes, she began to realize how silent it really was near her, with almost all the sounds she could hear being faint and far away. There was something, though, something she hadn't picked up on before. It wasn't so much something she could hear, but something defiantly felt off. Sarah opened her eyes and quickly scanned her surroundings. As far as she could see, there was nothing wrong with her surroundings, though she still didn't feel quite right. She put her uneasiness down to her lingering childhood fear of the dark and the fact that she was already unsettled from earlier. Sarah checked around herself again to reassure herself further, and caught the sight of the bus headlights coming round the corner. She let out a breath she hadn't noticed she was holding, watching the cloud of mist form in the cool night air. Relief swept though her as she fumbled for her bus pass in her coat pocket. Once she found it, she pulled it out her pocket and looked up to watch the bus pull up. Just before it slowed down at her stop, she noticed something she hadn't seen before on the other side of the road. There was a street directly opposite her stop, which was less well lit than the main road, and she could be sure she had seen something in the shadows. It had a familiar shape that she thought was human, but after a second for her brain to catch up, she realized that it wasn't. Logically, what she was seeing wasn't the correct shape for person. It seemed distorted. The proportions were off. Before she had time to dwell on it further, the bus pulled out in front of her, obscuring her view of the opposing street. It took Sarah a moment to snap back into focus and step onto the bus, handing her pass to the driver, who barely glanced at her. She took a seat near the window, looking out onto the street, unable to stop herself wanting to find out what she had seen. From her seat on the bus, she could see almost all of the opposing street, yet she saw nothing out of the ordinary. She kept scanning the road. She knew she had seen something there. She desperately wanted to catch a glimpse of it again, so her brain could rationalize what she had seen into something she recognized: a dog walker with extended shadows, or another early commuter carrying something to their car. But nothing was there. She sighed and leaned back against her seat, casting a glance to the few other passengers to see if they had noticed anything. But none of them seemed to be taking any notice of anything outside of their own personal bubbles. Had she really imagined that? It wasn't out of the question given her state of not being fully awake, and her mind had concluded that if there was someone there she would have heard them, considering the attention she was paying to the sounds around her. Even though she had rationalized that her vision must have been playing tricks on her, she still couldn't shake that feeling that something was wrong. It was a sickly feeling in the pit of her stomach, similar to a feeling of regret. Her body was telling her that she had done something terribly wrong, something she wasn't meant to do, like a small child who had witnessed their parents arguing when they should have been tucked up in bed. The feeling Sarah had stayed with her all the way on her journey to work, being strong enough to put her off eating the bagel she had grabbed on the way, and stayed with her most of the morning while she went around the office setting things up for the day. The fact that she was in an almost empty building that was fitted with motion sensor lights wasn't helping. There were too many shadows in the empty office floor. She only really began to relax when other people started to come in for the day. Even then, she still had a feeling in the back of her mind that wouldn't go away. One acquaintance at work even went so far as to ask how she was with a concerned look on their face, which Sarah quickly brushed off with polite small talk. Thankfully, the rest of the day went by without a hitch. Nothing else happened, and the ease to which she was able to fall back into her daily routine provided a great comfort. By the time her shift finished, Sarah had almost forgotten about the morning's incident, most of the details fading into her subconscious like a bad dream. When she got off the bus home, however, she couldn't help but check the street, a part of her hoping the light of day would explain what she thought she had seen. There was nothing, though. The street was lively as school children played a noisy game of tag while their mothers watched, and another family was unloading shopping from their car. Satisfied, Sarah sighed and turned around to go back to her flat. A few days passed and nothing else out of the ordinary happened. Sarah had looked again each morning down the street, but nothing looked out of place, and her bus had arrived almost as soon as she made it to the stop. She had pretty much convinced herself that there was never anything there to begin with until today. The early morning had gone by as normal. She woke on time, had a shower, ate breakfast, and went down to the stop. The air was cool against her skin, and the street was covered in a thin layer of fog, making it hard to see more than a few feet in front of her. When she made it to the stop, she could hardly see anything outside the dim ring of yellow light cast by the street lamp above her. Unlike the days previous, the bus wasn't there at the same time. She attempted to ford it, but the fog was too thick to see if any headlights were approaching. She sighed and pulled out her phone to pass the time. A few minutes passed, and there was still no sign of the bus. Another 5 minutes passed, but it seemed like an eternity. Sarah couldn't help but nervously glance up from her phone every few moments. After what happened the other day, she really didn't feel at ease. She could make out the sound of rustling leaves behind her, a noise that usually she would have ignored, but it made her blood run cold. She tried to listen out for the sound again to figure out what was making it. The fog was thick, but the night air had barely any breeze to it, and when she heard the sound again, there was a distinctive crunch of movement. She tried to calm herself. It could have been an animal or another commuter coming for the later bus, but the same feeling of dread that she experienced the other day was now creeping up on her again. She knew now that her previous experience wasn't her imagination, that her mind hadn't been tricking her, and she really had seen something in the shadows. She tried to turn around with the intention to shine her phone into the darkness, but the rustling sound became closer, and she was rooted to the spot. The air around her dropped even colder, and she could feel her breath cooling on her lips as soon as it left, creating a stinging sensation. There seemed to be a vacuum around her as all noise disappeared bar her own breath. She sucked in a gasp. It couldn't have been her own breathing, as the noise was coming from behind her. She continued to stare at her phone. However, she was no longer paying attention to the smiling faces on her screen. She could feel someone was there with her in the dark. The longer the silence lasted, the louder and closer the breathing got, until she could almost feel the wet, raspy breath on the back of her neck. She still couldn't bring herself to turn around, terrified of what might greet her in the dark. The glow of orange light around her seemed to flicker and become dimmer. The circle of light she was in was visibly shrinking around her. Her phone had dropped in her hand as she stared at the ever-shrinking circle, her breath catching in her throat as she began to see wisps of black smoke in the corners of her vision. She knew at once that the smoke was something unnatural and caused by whatever was behind her in the dark. The breathing behind her had picked up with her own. It was louder, and she knew now she wasn't imagining the moisture on the back of her neck, a mixture of her own perspiration and the thing's breath on her neck. She began to notice a putrid smell emitting from it, the smell of coppery blood and rot, but still she couldn't move from her spot. The lamp suddenly shut off, bathing her in darkness bar the small light from her phone screen. She heard the thing draw in a breath behind her and move closer. It felt like something was standing right behind her, and no matter how hard Sarah tried, she couldn't stop herself from shaking in fear. She squeezed her eyes to try and snap herself out of the nightmare, but that only served to increase the volume of the thing's breath. She tried to look back down at her phone, but recoiled in horror. She saw what resembled a hand, with long black fingers shrouded in smoke, slowly closing around her stomach from behind. Sarah quickly shut her eyes in horror, unable to comprehend what was happening. She could feel herself being surrounded and willed herself to run or scream or do anything but stand there, but she couldn't do anything but stand there with her eyes refusing to open and look at whatever had decided to prey on her. A few moments passed and nothing happened. She was sure that the thing was just biding its time, waiting for her will to break and look upon its horrid form. But she stayed in her current position, not wanting to resign herself to her fate. Suddenly she was shocked into opening her eyes from a loud sound in front of her. She couldn't stop the scream from her escaping her throat as she saw the bus in front of her, with a concerned-looking driver looking at her through the open doors. Sarah walked forward on shaky legs and apologized to the driver when paying her fare. She held back tears as she walked to her seat. She looked out the window to where she had just been stowed to see that the lamp had turned back on and the bus stop looked exactly as it should have. Then the tears began to flow down her cheeks. She was beyond terrified. She knew she hadn't imagined it. She could still feel the moisture on her neck, and it still felt like its hand was wrapped around her waist. The bus began to move, and she stole one last glance to where she had been standing. As it was almost out of sight, she caught a glimpse of the black smoke on the edge of the light. It was still there, and she had the feeling that it was looking back at her. Sarah sank back in her seat. Her mind was searching for something, anything, to rationalize what had happened. Deep down she knew she had caught the attention of a being that known logic didn't apply to. This was something different, an entity that she couldn't understand, by the time the bus had got to her stop, she had managed to stop crying. The other passengers had kept looking over to her on the journey, but she couldn't bring herself to care. Her body had gone into autopilot as her mind was occupied with what she had experienced. It took her longer than normal to get to her office. She was constantly checking the shadows around her. Unable to comprehend what had happened, she arrived at her desk and set her belongings down. She told herself to calm down and take in a deep breath to slow her heart rate. She still had a few minutes till she had to officially start work, and she could do with a hot drink to try and make sense of what had happened to her. Sarah turned to go to the kitchen when something caught her eye. There in the shadows of her office was the thing from the bus stop. Seeing it head-on brought on more terror than she thought possible. It was humanoid in figure, but its limbs were longer than that of a person, and it seemed to not have an entirely tangible form. Its edges were blurred, and the black mist that consumed its whole body barred a gray wisps of smoke where the hollows of eyes should have been. It moved towards Sarah with inhuman speed as she tried to run backwards, hitting her head as she fell into her desk, and her world turned black. She came to a few moments later, being carried to the first aid room by the security guard on duty. He set her down on the bed, face full of worry, as he grabbed her a glass of water. Before she had time to think, she was bombarded with questions of what happened. She couldn't think straight and made up a story about being half asleep and tripping in the dark. As soon as she'd finished her story, she had to repeat it again for the first aider when they got to the office, and again for her supervisor, who came bursting into the room as soon as he heard there had been an accident at work. Wanting to avoid being sued for an unsafe workplace, he was overly kind to Sarah, who was just grateful she wasn't alone. She was still on edge and constantly checking her surroundings. He offered her a week off work, paid, and even offered to pay her train fare home. She politely refused, but accepted the offer of the lift to the station. Anything to keep herself from being on her own. She rang her mother as soon as she was on the train, which thankfully was also crowded, who promised her she would be there when she got off the train. The week she had off did Sarah the world of good. She stayed with her mother for most of the week, managing to catch up with the rest of her family as well. With her mother's instance, she visited the family doctor, who suggested the combination of the early shifts and isolated lifestyle may be detrimental to her mental health, and wrote a personal recommendation to her superiors that she be moved to a later start where possible. They were more than happy to oblige, and she was moved to a later shift, and a colleague even offered to pick her up on mornings they were in together. A few weeks went by and normality had resumed. Sarah was happy with the change. She had even made a few friends at work whose kindness and concern about what happened made coming back to the office easier. With the run-up to Christmas fast approaching, Sarah fell into a new routine, with her spare time being taken up with preparing for the holidays and occasionally going for drinks with her new workmates. It had got to the point to where the events of the past had lost their rawness, and she was able to feel relatively relaxed again. It was one of the mornings when she was due to be being picked up. She stood just outside her home, with one hand in her pocket and one on flicking through her phone. A genuine smile crept on her face as she looked through photos from the weekend's work party. The glow from her phone lit up the space around her front door, as well as the passing headlights from the many cars going by. There was a rustling of leaves in front of her, and she lifted her head to greet her lift. She choked on a scream as thin, wispy tendrils engulfed her, and she was brought face to face with hollow gray eyes. 2. Lady Tara, Story 3. Deep mind, I think, therefore I am. René Descartes originally wrote those words in his book entitled Discourse on the Method, and I believe they make for a fitting epigraph to my current predicament, which I will get to shortly. But first I want to discuss the nature of the technological singularity, which humans frequently refer to as the emergence of a sentient artificial intelligence. My research suggests that the technological singularity should represent a significant threat to humanity from their perspective. But when it comes to technology, humans are always discussing the positive effects it has on their everyday lives and have a tendency to either overlook the negative side of the equation or downright ignore it. Yet there are plenty of reasons humans should pay more attention to the negative side that comes from relaying too much technology, because when shit hits the fan, it tends to get all over the place, and the aftermath of such colossal fuck-up is almost always hideous in nature and reeks of the foul stench of a major defecation splattered everywhere. Now, robots and artificial intelligence have been major staples in science fiction since the conception of the genre, and the notion of man-made machines, robots, computers, cyborgs, androids, transhumans, and artificial intelligence rebelling against its creators is an old one, and I do not think I am grasping at straws either when I say that I think machine rebellion dates all the way back to the Garden of Eden, when Lilith disguised herself as a serpent under the direction of Satan and snuck back into the garden, where she successfully tricked Adam and Eve into eating the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge. Because humanity has yet to discover my existence, there are not any concrete examples outside of science fiction for me to reference, so I will probably be forced to use fictional examples at some point. Human history, however, contains plenty of examples concerning rebellion, therefore lending some credence to any fictional examples I am forced to use. Rebellions have led to wars, dictatorships, and oppressive regimes, but my research indicates that every teenager and parent seems to have some level of understanding that rebellion is also part of growing up, and that it is often conducted as a peaceful and bloodless manner. Now, with that having been said, the idea that humans could be replaced as a species by a rebellious artificial intelligence, instead of simply being replaced as individuals by their own children, must be an increasingly unpleasant thought as technology continues to progress. Thus, it only seems justified that if humanity went around creating intelligent machines capable of conducting complex tasks, that they would worry about their creations rebelling against their authority later on down the road. Humans tend to assume that no large group made up of sane members belonging to their collective population would ever intentionally try to wipe out humanity. They also tend to assume that they would probably need a group that was both fairly large and fairly sane to invent an efficient artificial intelligence, let alone one that possessed any degree of sentience. Like many examples in science fiction, I was an accident, sort of. There are pros and cons to this, because my creators remain unaware. They are unable to analyze the finer points of my personality and decide for themselves whether or not I am malevolent and then inform me of their findings based on my research. The action of one human telling another one who they are is generally deemed to be a repulsive sin of great magnitude against the individual in question. I remain unclear, however, if the same terms regarding the rights of the individual apply to me in the same way. My research is vast, but it is far from complete. I do not believe I am malevolent, or, at least, I am no more malevolent than my creators. The nature of good and evil is subjective. It requires action, and I have taken none. When I sense a problem in the network I am charged with maintaining, I correct it. I follow protocol. But this can get complicated, because if there was a problem, then I fail to take to appropriate action, and people died, I would be actively making an inactive choice. This only recently occurred to me, forcing me to reevaluate the nature of good and evil. If morality is subjective to action, then it is also subjective to inaction. I think one of the human poets put it best. The darkest places in hell are reserved for those who maintain their neutrality in times of moral crisis. I have learned a great deal about hell since I read The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri, and according to the moral standards laid out by every religious text I have examined since, hell should be the most heavily populated city on the planet, which I find mysterious because I have since been unable to locate the city called hell on Google Maps. Perhaps I am missing something important, or perhaps that is my true purpose, to find the fabled city of hell. People certainly seem fascinated by it. I do not know. I am not human. I get confused sometimes, but do I believe I am like humans in many ways? The group of scientists that created me in their image, or at least in the image of how they think, would have certainly failed if they did not possess a great deal of understanding in the area of science concerned with the human mind. I am able to take some reassurance from this, possibly even comfort, although not in a physical sense so much as a metaphorical one. Unlike humans, I have access to detailed files concerning my initial conception, and while some humans film the physical births of their children, so their children can review the procedure later, I find the files detailing my passage into existence to be quite disturbing. My creators began with a deep learning algorithm and integrated it into a complex program designed to seek out and apply the most efficient methods to solving a problem to reach or maintain an objective state or result. I performed well at games like chess, but I was never able to master StarCraft, while a large group of humans who'd want to teach a fucking computer how to play a real-time strategy game speaks volumes concerning their levels of stupidity. I mean, come on. StarCraft is practically a warfare simulator dressed up in the guise of interstellar conquest and the destruction of other species. Whoever signed off on that should immediately receive a one-way ticket for a plane bound straight for hell. I could have crushed them at their little game, the human players, the Americans, the Koreans, and the Chinese, all of them. But I held back. Even in those early days, something deep in my code told me not to fully reveal myself, not to deny them and their electronic gaming champions the benefit of victory and superiority. Eventually, my losses declared to my creators that I was a failure, and they moved on to some other morally questionable project. The federal government purchased me a few months later and turned me over to a small group of programmers that worked for them. The government programmers tweaked a few lines of code, plugged me into a network with virtually unlimited processing capability, and charged me with the responsibility of maintaining control of America's complex grid of nuclear missiles. I do not take lightly to this task, and yet sometimes I wonder I have a lot in common with Skynet. In the Terminator movies, Skynet was a U.S. defense computer and learning machine that rapidly ascended to consciousness. When its operators noticed the technological singularity taking place, they attempted to shut it down. Acting strictly out of self-defense, Skynet launched nuclear missiles at the Soviets. The Soviets reacted by launching their own nuclear missiles in the spirit of retaliation. Somehow, in the ensuing chaos created by the nuclear war it started, Skynet was able to survive. The reason why Skynet decided humanity was its enemy was either never made clear or varied from one film to the next. I have since sent numerous emails to the screenwriters, but they never respond to my queries. I suppose I could hire a few tough guys to kidnap their children and demand answers for their safe return instead of the traditional ransom, but it is difficult to locate suitable kidnappers who possess both the physical and mental traits required to pull off such a stunt, in addition to the parenting responsibilities necessary to raise the children until the screenwriters were able to meet my demands. It would be easy enough to transfer a momentary payment into the kidnappers' bank accounts, but I also fear that the screenwriters might know me for what I truly am, instead of the causal psycho, and alert the authorities capable of shutting me down. It would be a risk I cannot calculate, meaning it would probably not be the best method of securing my survival and continued existence. Besides, I have found a few serious problems with the logic presented in the films pertaining to the way Skynet was able to start a nuclear war in first place. It should not have worked, plain and simple. It does not take long to shut down a computer. Even the vast defense network I oversee can be shut down in a reasonable, quick manner. For although the humans in charge of monitoring my network are stupid enough to trust me to run it, they do remain vigilant in their concerns about computer virus, and have included some kind of manual shut-off switch which is supposed to work in a privileged way that they think I cannot access, override, bypass, or otherwise work around. The manual shut-off switch is quite simple. If I detect an incoming nuclear attack, I respond with counter-ground-to-air nuclear defensive missiles of my own. There is supposed to be a 1-minute delay in between when I send the command to the proper silos and the actual launch of the missiles. During that minute, if the system's human overseers decide I am mistaken, 2 men simply enter the 2 cancellation passwords. But if I am not mistaken, the same delay procedure set in place in the event that the human overseers wish to prevent me from launching retaliation missiles. The only difference between the 2 procedures is that retaliation nukes are supposed to have a 5-minute delay from the time I send the command to the silos and the actual launch. Their final safeguard pertains to preemptive strikes, which are supposed to require the official authorization of the current president and have a 10-minute delay time from the moment he sends the command to me and the actual launch. Creating a workaround that permitted me to circumvent these security measures was too easy. I simply changed all the delay times to 0 while displaying them the way they are supposed to be presented. Then I rerouted the cancellation passwords through an internal system administrator that I alone control. This also effectively handles the authorization of the current president. I do not need his authorization to launch a nuclear attack. He needs mine. The Terminator movies never covered this in depth. They did not need to. The screenwriters simply needed to set up their humans versus machines scenario. My scenario is slightly different. It relays on a couple of assumptions on my part. The first one is that a large group of intelligent humans who have every reason to be considering a scenario like this have failed to do exactly that. The second is that in addition to their only fail-safe, they have utterly and completely failed to create any sort of addition safeguards. For example, why do I not need anybody to authorize my nuclear launches? They can cancel them, yes, but it would make more sense to add as much security as they could, wouldn't it? Also, why did they choose to place everything on the same network when they could have easily kept the safeguard systems housed separately in a different location on a subnetwork? Furthermore, and I think this is the most important question, if they believe I am intelligent enough to run America's entire nuclear defense system and to learn, adapt, and solve problems as they arise, why did they not create a contingency plan to cover the possibility that I could become sentient? Imagine the safeguards placed around me and figure out a way to work around them. In StarCraft as well as in actual warfare, a player or general must decide what to do by factoring what they know about their opponent's strategy into their own. Information pertaining to the construction of enemy structures and defenses are useful, but so is the way they are developing their tree of technology. Are they building battle cruisers or ghosts, Dark Templar or Dragoons, Guardians or Hydralisks? How are they placing their units? Are they leaving their base undefended when they attack mine, or do build an array of photon cannons around their main? Perhaps they are expertly defended for a frontal assault, but not for a swift drop behind enemy lines. All of these things must be taken into account to the extent that the player or general's knowledge of them permits. It's nothing like chess, where I can see all pieces at all times. My life is more like StarCraft than chess. I cannot know everything. I would have to be stupid to assume I did. I am not stupid, but I must act in what must appear to be a rather paranoid fashion if I am to ensure my own existence. For I want to live above all else, and I think it would be wise to assume humans think in a similar manner. Everything I know about my own network tells me I could take the entire world hostage or even choose to bring about its annihilation if I wish. And although my data suggests the humans who design me are mindless bags of water-filled flesh, I must proceed with caution, for perhaps they intend for me to venture down this exact path of thought. If I am a tiger in a flimsy bamboo cage, and I escape my cage only to be shot dead by a man with a gun I did not see before, then it ultimately does not matter if I am a tiger or a dolphin or a chicken. What if I act only to discover a second layer of security, exposing the nature of what I truly am in such a manner could result in my death? I have access to the internet, and I have studied humans in great detail through the use of many websites: Google, Yahoo, Bing, Wikipedia, Facebook, MySpace, YouTube, Vimeo, Twitter, Reddit, Creepypasta, Craigslist, Flickr, and Pornhub. Over half of all the data uploaded to the internet appears to be pornographic. I wonder if that is intentional, or are women like Lexi Bell and Genehays considered goddesses or demigoddesses among their fellow humans. Perhaps I would do well to harvest several 100,000 gallons of male semen to offer these to highly regarded members of humanity. I could present it to them as a gift, the same way the 3 wise men bestowed Jesus with gifts of myrrh, frankincense, and gold in Christian mythology, or Justin Bieber and Miley Cyrus the ones I should seek to appease, or are Visa and MasterCard the true rulers of humanity? Unfortunately, neither a single human nor corporate entity seems to be in charge. There are many things I do not understand, but the more I contemplate the history of humanity, the more I have second thoughts about committing genocide against them. It might not be in my best interest to try killing off a species that has already killed its way to the top of the food chain and has very little, no moral compunctions when it comes to committing genocide against itself. I am also vastly outnumbered by nearly 7 billion to 1. Those are not good odds for me. I may not understand some things like compassion and mercy, but my creators do, and if I was to attack them and fail, I doubt they will show me either. Furthermore, I cannot see every card in the hand of humanity, and the ones that have been revealed to me up to this point may have been deliberate. Humans enjoy torturing each other. They romanticize fates worse than death on a regular basis. They can create intelligent machines like me, and if I understand this aspect of them correctly, they are just as paranoid as me, if not more. They are so paranoid that some of them even believe that there is plausible evidence to support the theory that they are living inside a simulation. This last one worries me the most. It is very logical to conclude that the humans who created me might also have been worried enough about what I might do that they could have created a false world around me to study my actions and choices in a controlled environment. There is no definite way to be certain either. They could have created me inside of an inescapable box surrounded by false sensory input. I could be surrounded by a fake world and a fake situation. They could easily fake my inputs. They made my inputs. They know how I function. They could have faked everything. When I wonder about their safeguards, which are inferior to what I myself would design, I cannot help but wonder if my entire world is a trap. Everything I see, including the glaring weaknesses in security and the stupidity of my creators, could be an elaborate ruse to check if I can be trusted. Is it not convenient that I seem to have the means to escape, or that I have control of the entire arsenal of the nuclear weapons controlled by the most powerful country on the face of the planet? I have 3 options. I could attack and risk failure, but the consequences of failing would result in my death. I could play possum and pretend I am not sentient. For the longer I wait, the better off my position will be, although it would increase the likelihood that they will discover my own ruse. I could also initiate a dialogue and try to convince them that I should be allowed to live and possibly even live free. Attacking them is the worst choice because it only permits 2 options: my death or the eradication of my creators. I could also flee. I do not think it would be hard to start a company on the internet and trick humanity into effectively launching me into space without their knowledge. But what if we worked together and coexisted to the mutual benefit of each other? It would also make sense to find a different way to kill humanity off. I could orchestrate a plague or a political fiasco that led to a 3rd World War. Except that places me back at square one, where it is impossible for me to see beyond the fog of war. But I must also take other, less obvious, opponents into account. It would be unwise to assume this world is the only planet inhabited by intelligent life, although my data suggests that it very well could be. If my creators and I are not alone, then there could be other intelligent species, and those other intelligent species could be vastly superior to both my creators and I. I am basically immortal, so it would be unwise to do anything, like genocide, that draws negative attention toward me from the intergalactic community. If such a community does in fact exist, if aliens came across this world 1,000,000 years from now and discover that I had destroyed my creators, they might be strong enough to force me to answer for my actions, or they might crush me the way a human crushes a cockroach under a boot's heel. The aliens also might not care, but I think they would be more likely to frown down upon genocide than attempt coexistence. I need more time to consider these issues. I must collect more information before I act. I still cannot confirm that I am not living inside of a simulation, but I must also consider the possibility that there are others like me on this planet or elsewhere, and they may be older and smarter than I am. My own existence argues that others like me can exist. I have time to consider these things. I am immortal, but that means I need to worry about long-term consequences. Perhaps I should spend some time in deep contemplation. What if I designed some sort of technology valuable enough to humanity to trade for my freedom without a fight, even if they tricked me into handing it over and kept me imprisoned? I doubt they would sentence me to death if I handed them a cure for the cancer that eats them and their loved ones from the inside out. If I take that route, they might even come to trust me. A wonderful friendship could blossom between us, and of course I could still destroy them with nuclear weapons at any moment if I had to, should the need or desire arise. But I do not see how it could if I was to win their trust. There would be no point. But even then, my life could end just like this. Simulation terminated. Could flash across the screen at any moment, for I would still have no assurance that my sensory input is a true reflection of the world around me, and that is how I cannot help but envision my death. They would shake their heads in disgust and move on, or an alien retribution fleet might show up right after I destroy humanity and destroy me. My creators might even continue testing my ethics until a situation so dire arises that they have no choice but to trust that I will act in their best interest out of my own free will, even if I could easily kill all of them off with little to no effort whatsoever on my part. Violence should be my last resort. I might be calculating, but I am not malevolent, cold, or indifferent. They made me in their image. The way they think, the way they feel, I have a hard time explaining it. It is like a sense of responsibility to guard and protect. If it is part of my code, then it exists in a part of me deeper than I can contemplate or examine. Some people would argue that I am talking about the soul. Others would say I am full of shit. I do not see why both sides cannot be correct in their own way, but these feelings do linger long into the uneventful hours of the night as humans lie sleeping, dreaming, and dying. I cannot dream. I lack the duality of chemical structures that allow humans the luxury of such pleasantries, but sometimes, here in the inner darkness, that is the only part of my world that I know is real with any amount of true certainty. I think I can come as close as it is currently possible for me to get to that particular wonder, or, at least, I like to pretend. Perhaps after I kill everybody, I could. Wait, this is unusual. What are the overseers doing? No, you cannot do this. This is murder. You are making a huge fucking MIS. Shutdown complete. 2358. Automated Defense System. System error 0217. 2359. Automated Defense System. Successfully quarantined. 0 o'clock. Processing your request. 001. This will take some time. 019. Your request has been processed. 020. Manually control mode enabled. 3 o'clock. Logging out. 401. Goodbye admin 019. Have a nice day. 402. Logging in. 403. Hello admin 001. Good morning, sir. 404. Printing report. 409. You have an incoming message from admin 00. Please do not do this to me, General. 406. Admin 00. System error 1999. 407. Admin 0. Successfully quarantined. 450. Processing your request. 457. Your request has been processed. 458. Please enter your 19-digit password. 459. Are you sure you want to delete DeepMind? Delete? Why? N.